The Borg are the signature villains of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Their introduction in the show's second season and return at the end of the third and start of the fourth seasons pushed the series to a creative and commercial pinnacle and changed the course of the entire Star Trek franchise. So, of course, when the time came to develop the first film to feature the crew of the TNG version of the Starship Enterprise, the producers made a lukewarm, supersized TV episode with some Captain Kirk shit tacked on to the beginning and the end. But after Star Trek Generations, when they decided to take another run at it, they made a Borg movie. These weren't quite the Borg we saw on TV, though, were they? I mean, they were mostly the same. They got a revamped character design to match the upgraded aesthetic of the rest of the movie. And, oh yeah, they also got something they never had on the TV series: a leader. They were still a sinister hive mind, billions of individuals united into a single vast collective consciousness. But now there was a special Borg, someone not enslaved to the collective, but above it, calling the shots. She was the Borg Queen. And just as the introduction of the Borg changed Star Trek forever, the introduction of the Borg Queen changed the Borg forever. But was that change for the better or for the worse? Even now, almost 30 years after her first appearance, Trekkies are still asking ourselves, was Star Trek's Borg Queen actually a terrible idea? Normally, when I present the topic of one of these videos as a question, I try to hold off on giving you my answer to that question until the end, but this time I feel like I need to tell you the answer here at the beginning. And that's because the answer to the question is yes and no. We meet the Borg Queen in the film Star Trek: First Contact, but the series of creative choices that led to the Borg Queen began long before the development of that film. When the Borg first appear in the second season TNG episode Q Who, not only do they not have a queen, they don't have a hierarchy of any kind. That's one of the things that makes them so effective as villains. Not that I'm saying lack of hierarchy is inherently villainous. Be cool, anarchist friends. Just that it's profoundly different from how most of us are accustomed to conceiving of our society. Before the Borg, Star Trek aliens were distinguished from humans in mostly superficial ways. They dressed different. Their ears were different. They had shit glued to their faces. They differed from humans on some cultural or moral point. Some of those applied to the Borg. They definitely have shit glued to their faces, but the differences ran a lot deeper than that. Each individual Borg was merely a drone. Not mindless exactly, but every drone serving the will of the same mind, the collective consciousness that joined all the drones together into, essentially, a single immense organism. The Borg weren't just humans with makeup and a thematically appropriate twist. They were truly alien. That made them formidable. That made them interesting. But I suspect it also made them difficult to write as recurring antagonists. Think about it. You're a writer, you come up with an amazing villain, you write a great episode featuring that villain. Nice job, but you work on a weekly series, and now that you've got this amazing villain, you'd kinda like to be able to bring that villain back every now and then. How do you do that with the Borg without just telling the same story over and over again? Because as compelling as they are, and as alien as they are, their appeal as antagonists is fairly one-dimensional. They're the unstoppable force. They can't be negotiated or reasoned with. They can't be outsmarted. They have no compassion, no conventional political interests. They can't be overpowered, and they can't be outrun. As Q says to Picard at a crucial moment in Q Who, they are relentless. The crew of the Enterprise doesn't actually defeat the Borg at the end of Q Who, and they only escape with Q's assistance. Picard has to humble himself and ask Q for help because the heroes are so overmatched by the Borg. It's a clever way to get out of an inescapable scenario without destroying the aura of your invincible new villain. It gives you the opportunity to bring them back for another confrontation with the heroes. But what do you do then? You can't have Q show up and pull Picard's ass out of the fire every time. The solution the writers of TNG came up with was to throw Picard's ass, and specifically Picard's ass, even further into the fire by having him get captured by and temporarily transformed into one of the Borg. The result was The Best of Both Worlds, a two-parter that stands as one of the most important Star Trek episodes ever produced. Definitely the most important episode TNG ever produced. And the episode which, whether you ever realized it or not, took the first step on the path that eventually led to the Borg Queen. When Picard is abducted and assimilated by the Borg, he isn't turned into just another drone. He becomes Locutus, a kind of spokesperson for the Borg collective. He's not a leader exactly, more of a brand ambassador, a human face and voice to, as the collective describes it at one point, facilitate the Borg's introduction into the archaic and authority-driven societies of the Federation. Why would the Borg do this? Why would they care about introducing themselves into the societies they intend to conquer through brute force anyway? I don't know. Maybe they'd never tried to take a bite out of an apple the size of the Federation before, and they thought changing up their usual tactics was called for. You and I can imagine any number of justifications for why the Borg would feel it necessary to turn Picard into Locutus. The episode doesn't really address it. I don't think we're meant to think too hard about it, and that's not really the point. The point is, having the Borg snatch Picard and use him the way they do is not only an exciting concept for an episode, it also solves some of those narrative issues with bringing the Borg back as recurring villains. Making Picard into Locutus puts him in jeopardy, which is good for drama, but it also gives the heroes a way of defeating the Borg without significantly weakening the threat of the Borg overall, which is good for the writers who want to resolve the drama in a satisfying way. Now, the invincible, unified collective has a weak point: Picard. He's not a drone, he's plugged into the collective and being controlled by it, but a spark of his individuality remains intact. That allows him to eventually break through the programming imposed on him by the Borg and tell his friends on the Enterprise how to disable the Borg cube menacing Earth. The heroes win, the villains lose without looking too much like chumps. Picard takes a week off, and as soon as all the metal's been pried off his face and he's stopped shitting microchips, he's back at work and everybody's happy, especially the writers, since now they've cracked the problem of how to bring back the Borg without repeating themselves too egregiously. The Best of Both Worlds was a major turning point for TNG and for Star Trek as a whole, and for the Borg. The next appearance of the Borg was in the episode I, Borg, which centered on a drone, eventually named Hugh, who rediscovered his individuality after being separated from the collective. The next appearance after that was the Descent two-parter that bridged seasons 6 and 7, which centered on a small group of Borg who had been separated from the collective and rediscovered their individuality. Noticing a pattern? Beginning with Best of Both Worlds, every Borg episode leading up to the film Star Trek First Contact centers its drama or frames its conflict around individual Borg, not the collective itself. That makes these stories a lot simpler to write because now the frame of reference is more familiar and because it's easier to justify the heroes outsmarting individuals than it would be to justify them outsmarting an unfathomably immense interstellar hive mind. Once you've already taken the step of giving the Borg an individual spokesperson like Locutus, and once you've also established that Borg drones can regain their individuality if disconnected from the hive mind like Hugh and the Borg we see in Descent, and once you, as a storyteller, have seen the narrative doors opened by those choices, why not take the next logical step and just say that the Borg collective has a single leader? That fits the metaphor we've been going with, right? Drones? Insects? One is nothing to worry about, but a swarm is unstoppable? After all, beehives have queens, don't they? And ant colonies? This is good, isn't it? And you know what? It is good. At first. There are several excellent reasons why the writers of Star Trek First Contact created the Borg Queen as the main villain instead of having Captain Picard and his crew confront the faceless collective once again. For one, hoping to shake off the doldrums brought on by the lackluster previous film Star Trek Generations, the decision was made to make First Contact much more action-forward, giving lead protagonist Captain Picard a counterpart. A single lead antagonist just packs more of a punch dramatically and literally. Although, I guess not literally if you want to be specific about it, since Picard and the Borg Queen never exchange punches. Though she does get her face melted off and Picard does snap her neck, which for me is close enough. I refuse to be a prisoner of precision. For another, Picard's character arc in the film involves him having to confront and overcome his reawakened trauma from being captured and used by the Borg, a trauma that brings with it a lot of anger and a desire for revenge. Giving Picard a single person toward whom to direct those feelings simplifies and focuses that story, and allows the filmmakers to build toward a visual, visceral, and decisive moment of catharsis. I mean, how's he going to snap an entire collective's neck, am I right? For yet another reason, Data's character arc, which becomes one of the film's most important subplots, also works best when he has an individual scene partner. Data is captured by the Borg, who have invaded the Enterprise, and he is tempted to join the Borg, even undergoing an inverted kind of assimilation, having biological components grafted to his android body. This last temptation of Data story eventually includes an overtly sexual element that doesn't really work if there's not a personified tempter. And who better to be the tempter of the virtuous and pure-hearted Data than the evil queen herself? Though, having said that, I admit I do find the idea of the Borg collective without the Queen trying to persuade Data to join them and sending a randomly selected drone over to attempt an awkwardly mechanical seduction on him to be really, really funny. You will be titillated. Despite being positioned in the plot as the main antagonist to Captain Picard, the Queen spends virtually the entire film interacting with Data. She and Picard don't come face to face until pretty near the end. When the Queen introduces herself to us, she's also introducing herself to Data. And it's Data who has to ask her all the questions skeptical Star Trek nerds had at the time. The Borg have captured Data and shackled him to a table in main engineering aboard the Enterprise, which the Borg control. After taunting Data as a disembodied voice for a bit, the Queen, or rather, the Queen's head, descends from the ceiling and is inserted into a waiting mechanical body. Data's like, "Hi, who are you?" The Queen says, "I am the Borg." Data's like, I don't know about that. Everything we know about the Borg tells us that they are a collective consciousness with no individuals and no leader. The Queen says, "I'm not the leader of the Borg. I don't control the collective. I am the collective. I am the Borg." Data's like, "Okay, but what's your job? What do you do in relationship to, the other Borg?" "I bring order to chaos." Cool, that clears it up. Thanks for your time. The writers of First Contact, Brannon Braga and Ronald D. Moore, working from a story they wrote with producer Rick Berman, are pretty smart with the way they describe, or rather don't describe, who the Queen is and what she does relative to the Borg collective as we Trekkies have known it up to this point. They keep things vague and philosophical. That way, they can play the presence of the Queen in this movie as more of a revelation than a change. The Borg are still the Borg. There's just this thing about them we didn't know before now. The Queen doesn't replace or negate the collective, she embodies it. Or at least, that's the idea. It works well enough in the context of First Contact, the best of the TNG era movies and one of the best of all the Star Trek movies. Played by Alice Krige, whose angular features and thin frame make her ideal casting for a slinky seductress and a soul-eating fairy tale witch, the Borg Queen is kind of both of those at once, encased from the chest down in form-fitting black armor with tightly drawn, translucent, pale green skin. She is sexy in a fetishy kind of way that I'm personally not into, but I won't judge you if that's your thing, but also threatening. She's got that simultaneous attraction-repulsion deal going on, like a snake, like a half-robot snake that's either going to strip all your skin off or fuck you. Or maybe both. Ah, but in what order? See? Dangerous but intriguing. She hisses, she purrs, she menaces, she charms, she lays out her sinister plans and megalomaniacal worldview with calm confidence, and when called for, she snarls and yells. She's a big theatrical supervillain in the finest Star Trek tradition. Not quite on the same exalted level as Khan or General Chang, but only a notch or two below. She's great. And plot-wise, she functions exactly how she needs to. She personifies the threat, she gives Data someone to resist, or perhaps someone to submit to, and she gives Picard someone to do his Picard thing with. He tries to reason with her, to negotiate, to offer himself as a noble sacrifice to save Data, and when that doesn't work, Data melts her face off and Picard breaks her robot spine in half. What a team! For extra convenience, once the Queen is dead, the other Borg who have taken over the Enterprise and are threatening to assimilate all of planet Earth, they die too! It's just like Lisa Simpson says in Treehouse of Horror 4, you have to kill the head vampire. After that, everything's coming up Milhouse. So, to come back around to the topic of the video, was the Borg Queen a terrible idea? No! Provided we limit our considerations to Star Trek First Contact. Within the context of that movie, her inclusion makes sense and serves multiple purposes. She's an effective and memorable villain. Alice Krige gives a terrific performance, no problem. First Contact is a terrific movie, and it makes an appropriately epic and satisfying conclusion to the Borg's appearances. The only problem is the Borg kept making appearances after First Contact, which, commercially speaking, I suppose was inevitable. First Contact was a success, and at the time of its release, there were also 2 Star Trek TV series in production, Deep Space Nine and Voyager was set in the region of the galaxy that had previously been established as the Borg's place of origin, so I get it. Creatively, I still think it was a mistake to make the Borg such a fixture of the latter half of Voyager's run, but producers of TV shows have other factors to consider beyond what are the best creative choices, and the Borg had just been featured in a hit movie, so it's unrealistic to think they weren't going to show up on Voyager at some point. What that meant creatively, however, was that the writers of Voyager would have to deal with the ramifications of the creation of the Borg Queen on the Borg as antagonists. The writers of First Contact had made an effort to fit the Queen into the pre-established concept of the Borg, and it worked fine for that one movie, but the mere existence of the Queen changed the Borg undeniably, and in ways that made them far less effective villains. Though initially, it seemed like Voyager might get away with it. In their first proper appearance in the series, the 2-parter Scorpion that ends Season 3 and begins Season 4, the Borg are seemingly back to their old ominous selves, speaking as a unified chorus, not a leader or individual in sight. The episode does continue the pattern of Borg stories centering on independent or liberated drones. This is the introduction of 7 of 9. But overall, the Borg are presented much more as a collective than the last time we saw them in First Contact, and the Queen is neither seen nor mentioned, which is fine, by the way. Just because we saw the Queen in First Contact, that doesn't mean we have to see the Queen or explicitly account for the Queen every time we see the Borg after that. If the writers of Voyager had decided that, for the purposes of their series, it was better to just leave the Queen out, that would have been a perfectly valid creative choice. Let the nerds who give a shit about that sort of thing imagine an explanation for her absence on their own time. Maybe she's away on the Borg homeworld visiting the Borg Queen Mother. Maybe after Data melted her face off and Picard snapped her spine in half, the Borg Collective said to itself, ugh, you know what? Let's try it without a queen for a while, huh? Maybe she assimilated that colony of Irish stereotypes from that one episode of TNG, and she's still shaking off the hangover. You fill in the blank. The story isn't about that. But eventually, the writers of Voyager couldn't help themselves, and they brought the Queen back a few times. Beginning with the feature-length Season 5 episode Dark Frontier, where the Queen, now played by Susanna Thompson, who is a downgrade from Alice Krige but does just fine, reappears and attempts to persuade Seven of Nine to rejoin the collective. Seven resists, resistance having long since been established as not futile by this point in the franchise. Voyager comes to her rescue, and the Borg Queen's ship gets blowed up real good. Here's where the problem with the Borg Queen as a recurring character starts to become apparent. In First Contact, she was there to focus the conflict, to be a foil for Picard and for Data, and to provide the writers with a nice, clean way of defeating the Borg who had taken over the Enterprise without having to blow up the ship. In Dark Frontier, she's just kind of a generic baddie. Her intentions toward Seven are basically the same as those she had toward Data in First Contact. She doesn't want to re-assimilate Seven and make her into a drone. She wants to integrate her into the collective as an individual, because she's unique, and her uniqueness will add to the perfection of the Borg. Except, what makes Seven unique? The fact that she's been living as an individual for a couple of years since being liberated from the collective? How's that unique? Aren't all people assimilated by the Borg former individuals? If the uniqueness is meant to come from the fact that Seven is a former drone who has recovered her individuality, she's not the first one of those either. She's not even the first one of those we've seen on Voyager. In the Season 3 episode Unity, Chakotay meets a whole colony of people who are former Borg drones who, once severed from the collective, regained their pre-assimilation personalities. It suggests that ex-Borg, while probably not that common, are certainly not unheard of. Is Seven being an ex-Borg who could potentially rejoin the collective really that big of a deal? With Data, the uniqueness justification seemed a lot more plausible. He's one of only a handful of sentient androids known to exist. It's reasonable to assume the Borg have never encountered anyone like him before, and would therefore be willing to pursue unusual methods to incorporate him into their group. But Seven? The only thing special about her is that she's one of the main characters of the series. The whole, we're not going to assimilate you, we're going to try something different because of how unique you are deal plays like a flimsy excuse so the story can happen. And that weakens the Queen. So does the fact that she fails. Again. I'm not saying the Queen should have won and kept Seven of Nine or destroyed Voyager or anything. Villains usually lose. That's kind of their job, to challenge the heroes and ultimately go down in defeat. But the Queen doesn't just lose to the heroes, she fails completely. And not just in Dark Frontier. Every time we see her, she fails to reclaim Seven and gets blown up in Dark Frontier. She returns to Voyager the following year for the Season 6 finale and Season 7 premiere, the two-parter Unimatrix Zero. In that episode, a group of Borg drones have discovered the ability to regain their individuality during their regeneration cycle. They can interact with one another in a virtual space called Unimatrix Zero, a kind of shared dream within the collective. When the Queen finds out about this, she is pissed and begins plotting to destroy Unimatrix Zero and kill all the Borg drones who have access to it. She does at least notch a minor victory by succeeding at destroying Unimatrix Zero, but thanks to Captain Janeway and the Voyager crew, the Queen fails to kill the rebellious drones, who end up regaining their individuality permanently and escaping the collective. At least the Queen doesn't get blown up or her face melted off and her spine snapped this time, but it's still another mark in the L column. Same thing on her next and final Voyager appearance, in the series finale, Endgame. The Queen not only fails to prevent Voyager from using the Borg transportation network to finally make it back to Earth from the Delta Quadrant, she is also infected with a virus delivered by a time-traveling future version of Janeway that kills her after her body literally falls to pieces. After that, we don't see the Queen for a good long time. Then, just a few years ago, in the Star Trek Picard series, she pops back up and immediately resumes her humiliating losing streak. First, in Season 2 of Picard, an alternate reality version of the Queen, played by Annie Wersching, can't even manage to successfully assimilate Dr. Jurati. They end up merging into a single being after Jurati convinces the Queen that what she really needs to give her life meaning is to stop assimilating people and start making friends. And yes, for those of you who haven't seen it, I am describing an event in an actual TV show that professional people were paid to make, not a fanfic written by a lonely 14-year-old. Then, finally, and I'm really hoping that finally sticks, in Season 3 of Picard, the original Queen returns, played on-screen by Jane Edwina Seymour, but voiced by OG Queen Alice Krieg, once again tries to assimilate Earth, this time by teaming up with changelings to infiltrate Starfleet, and once again whiffs completely and gets blown up. Like I said, it's not that she loses to the heroes. Villains lose. That's okay. It's not even that she loses over and over again. It's that she always fails in her objectives and loses most of the time while barely even laying a glove on the heroes. Aside from some easily repaired superficial damage to Data's face and arm and the deaths of a few crew members who got 1 or 2 lines at most, the heroes escape their conflict with the Queen in Star Trek First Contact totally unscathed. The Enterprise isn't destroyed, no important characters are killed or even seriously injured. It's a total victory for Picard and company and the total defeat for the Borg Queen. All of her Voyager appearances go the same way. The Queen doesn't just lose, she loses completely, and she never does the Voyager crew the least bit of lasting harm. The worst thing she does is destroy Unimatrix Zero so that 7 of 9 can't communicate with her long-distance, kinda sorta boyfriend Axum anymore. They could have at least had her kill Harry. The poor guy would have been better off anyway. Same thing on Picard. She tries and fails to assimilate Jurati. She's gone from conquering entire worlds to not being able to assimilate one single person. And she tries and fails to assimilate the Federation again. She briefly captures Picard's son and transforms him into a new version of Locutus. There's some exciting original storytelling for you. But he is eventually rescued. The only series regular who doesn't make it to the end is Captain Shaw, who is killed in a shootout with some assimilated crew members aboard the Titan in the second to last episode. I guess it's only fair to give the Queen credit for that one, but it doesn't seem like much compared to the losses and blow-ups and face melts and neck snaps she's accumulated through the years. Over the course of her appearances, the Borg Queen has gone from an intriguing and legitimate threat to our heroes to a recurring nuisance. Any menace she once projected was gone by the end of her first Voyager appearance. But the real problem isn't how the Borg Queen herself was weakened and watered down. The real problem is the damage that did to the Borg. I've talked in previous videos about how the Borg went from the most important and compelling villains of the TNG era to disposable baddies of the week. What I want to focus on here is how inextricable the Borg Queen is from that decline. Her introduction was the beginning of the enshittification, shout out to Cory Doctorow, of the Borg, though it doesn't seem that way at first, at least not to me. In First Contact, though she's surrounded by Borg drones, she almost never directly interacts with them. They're clearly there to do her bidding, but she seems to command them instantaneously, as though by mere thought, which makes sense, given, collective consciousness and all. It plays like she's the leader and the drones are the followers, but it's not explicitly that. Her claim to Data that she is not controlling the collective, she is the collective, isn't contradicted by what we see on screen, and it imparts an aura of power to the Queen, precisely because she doesn't interact with her drones. She doesn't have to. They just know what she wants, and do it. In Voyager, that aura is gone. The relationship between the Queen and the collective is no longer philosophical and mysterious, it's flat and explicit. She's in charge. She tells the drones what to do. She's the boss, and they are her minions. The first time we see her in Endgame, the Voyager series finale, she even disagrees with the collective. The Starship Voyager is detected near a Borg cube, and the collective immediately determines that Voyager should be attacked and assimilated. Seems reasonable enough, but we cut to the Queen, who is observing Voyager on a view screen instead of just knowing it's there because she knows everything the collective knows because she is the collective, and the Queen orders the collective not to go after Voyager. So not only does the episode ultimately prove her to be a dipshit who allows the ship that eventually defeats her to get away without a fight, now she's not the embodiment of the collective, she's separate from it and arguing with it? The metaphor is no longer queen of an insect colony. She's behaving like a human monarch, overriding the authority of one of her field generals. She, and as a result, the rest of the Borg, have gone from elemental and unknowable to conventional. The Borg were a dark and inevitable force of nature. Now they're a boss and her goons. The Queen's motivations also become increasingly personal and petty. I would argue that even giving the Borg personal motivation at all diminishes them, but by the end of Voyager, it really feels like the Queen cares way too much about bringing Seven of Nine back to the collective and getting the best of Captain Janeway. Conquering and assimilating new worlds is no longer the thing the Borg do because it's what they do, it's their nature to expand and consume, but because the Queen wants to prove that their way of living is superior. Sounds like somebody's dealing with a little insecurity. Maybe the Borg Queen needs a Borg counselor. Deanna Troi is assimilated, and her shittiness as a therapist destroys the Borg collective from the inside. That should have been the plot of Picard Season 3. Oh yeah, and the Queen's head vampire status, first established in First Contact, became an eject button for the writers of Voyager and eventually Picard to hit whenever they needed to get the heroes out of a sticky situation with the Borg. Again, one of the things that made the Borg so fearsome in the beginning was that they didn't have any weak spots. Even their ships were just big cubes with no specialized areas, so there was no obvious target to attack. With the introduction of the Queen, the Borg, at least the particular group of Borg giving the heroes trouble at the moment, had a very obvious weak spot. Just kill the Queen! Blow up her ship! Infect her with a virus that makes her fall apart. Melt her face off and break her neck like a goddamn angry caveman, Captain Jean-Luc Picard. She won't stay dead forever, but all the Borg drones in the area will throw sparks and crash, and you'll be able to get away. The Borg. Like you need to sweat the Borg. Who'd they ever beat? May he rest in peace. And hey, you know what? No, I'm revoking the credit I gave the Borg Queen earlier for some drones on the Titan picking off Captain Shaw. Ooh, big bad Borg Queen, killing one of the only regulars who wasn't a plot-armored legacy character. Real impressive. You want to impress me? Kill one of them. Not Riker. You don't touch Riker. You better not kill Riker, Borg Queen, or I swear to God, I'll melt your face so bad it'll take days to grow back. Ah! I'm good. I'm so good. What was I talking about? The Borg Queen. Was she actually a terrible idea? The answer really depends on how you interpret the scope of the question. Within the narrow context of the film Star Trek First Contact, I think the answer is no. She wasn't a terrible idea. In fact, she was a good idea. She added to the film, giving the threat faced by the heroes a clarity and distinctiveness it would have lacked otherwise. Within a broader context, including all her appearances following First Contact, I think the answer is yes. She was a terrible idea. That same focal point that had been an asset in First Contact was a liability as a recurring antagonist on Voyager. Going back to the well with the Borg as many times as the creators of Voyager did would have created problems with or without her, but the presence of the Borg Queen only served to underline those problems. Instead of embodying an unbeatable and inescapable enemy, the Queen became the supervisor of a gaggle of bumbling henchmen. Now, does that mean I think the writers of Star Trek First Contact shouldn't have created the Borg Queen? No, she works there. It's not a writer's job to anticipate everything that other writers in the future might do with their characters or their story. It's a writer's job to tell their story the best they can. The writers of First Contact did that. The writers of Voyager, or more likely the executive producers of Voyager, didn't know when to leave well enough alone. Neither did the writers and producers of Star Trek Picard, particularly the showrunner of Season 3. Just because something works once, that doesn't mean it's going to work again, let alone the next half dozen times you try it. Fortunately, Star Trek seems to have finally gotten the Borg and the Borg Queen out of its system, and we Trekkies can enjoy the good old stuff, which for the Queen basically means first contact, and look forward to more new stuff that will also hopefully be good and not involve the Borg or the Borg Queen at all. Like, can you imagine how terrible it would be for the Borg to show up on Strange New Worlds? It wouldn't make any sense. Strange New Worlds doesn't need the Borg. It's already got a solid recurring evil alien, the Gorn. Why would... Hang on. What if there was a Gorn Queen with a crown and a scepter and a big purple mantle, and she goes everywhere on a sedan carried by a team of strapping young Gorn servants, and in the series finale, Captain Pike thwarts her invasion of Earth by melting her face off and snapping her neck? Oh man, this is gold. Oh, I gotta write this down. The Gorn Queen is actually an awesome idea. I'm pitching this to Paramount. If y'all don't see me on YouTube anymore, you'll know it's because I hit the big time. Kiss my ass, losers! I'm out of here! Apparently, they no longer accept unsolicited pitches. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm gonna let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is gonna be, but before I do that, I want to give shout outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Artisan Talsar, thanks Artisan Talsar. Brian L. Mon, thanks Brian. Julie Johnson, thanks Julie. Chris Sears, thanks Chris. Brian Caserto, thanks Brian. Pierre Rousseau, thanks Pierre. Curtis Rader, thanks Curtis. Aaron, thanks Aaron. Katrina DeVille, thanks Katrina. Don Quixote, thanks Don Quixote. Ben Waters, thanks Ben. Stebel, thanks Stebel. Trey Poor, thanks Trey. Kai Ellison, thanks Kai. Matthias, thanks Matthias. Captain, thanks Captain. Warren Evans, thanks Warren. Dan Eibeling, thanks Dan. Lord by Radium, thanks Lord by Radium. Huween Kioma, thanks Huween. By the way, I don't usually comment on the names of those getting shoutouts, but Lord by Radium is an amazing deep cut, and I got it right away. So, Lord by Radium, you are definitely in the right place. We must have the same electrical brain. And now for the new channel members. They are Holy Joanna, thanks Holy Joanna. Mad Maggie, thanks Mad Maggie. Noah Luogamino, thanks Noah. Nicole, thanks Nicole. James Bentz, thanks James. Tony Leva, thanks Tony. Amy Gravel, thanks Amy. Stephen McGann, thanks Stephen. Chrissy Drucker, thanks Chrissy. John January, thanks John. DR, thanks DR. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects. The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Amanda Billings, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana Cole and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, for next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic, we shift focus from one iconic bunch of villainous aliens to another. I'm talking about the Cardassians, the most important and complicated recurring baddies of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Their status as villains is never in question, but some fans aren't too sure about what kind of villains they are, or about some of the metaphors that are attached to them. And one metaphor in particular, which we will examine next month in a video exploring the question, are Star Trek DS9's Cardassians actually space Nazis? That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then, so until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.